Hey, greetings, it's Fred in Alaska. Thanks for joining me. A lot of buzzing going on. It's Alaska in the early spring, so a lot of the little bush planes are starting to swarm around like mosquitoes again, so that's a plus. Be able to get out more into the woods. It just now melted enough for me to get back into my backyard, so that's a plus. What I wanted to share with you today comes from Tim. Tim, about a decade ago, he was into his fourth year working at a fishing lodge on the Nushagak River. I'll leave that name out of it because it's irrelevant. Because he had been there so long, he had gotten to know a few of the locals pretty well. And on one of his, he had prearranged time off, roughly about 4 or 5 days, to hang out with his local buddies that he's gotten to know over the course of the last 3-4 years. And so he had them pick him up at the lodge in their skiff, and their plan was to go up the Kokwok River. He had never been. He had been by the mouth of it because it's a tributary to the Nushagak there, and which is a few miles below Kokwok on the Nushagak River. So the locals, I happen to know the locals and whatnot, so it made it easier for Tim to share with me, because he was a little nervous about the experience and about sharing with it. So Tim, I appreciate you being willing to share. So he gets picked up by these two local guys, his buddies that he's made acquaintance with over the course of some years, and their plan was to go up the Kokwok River. And at the mouth of it, because of the way the ice comes out in the spring, this big gnarly gravel bar is usually there. It's kind of like a teardrop shaped gravel bar. They get above that, and this is towards the end of July. They get up in there, and a little ways past that point, the mouth of it and whatnot, within a half mile, he said, they came across a subsistence gill net that was set into the water, but it looked messed up. It looked tampered with. And so as they're getting closer, it looked like a bunch of driftwood had gone into this net. And so they're like, oh, well, let's help these people out. You know, they're trying to subsist. Let's pick this little debris out of the net. Well, as they're messing with the net, they notice that the branches are weaved into it, which I've heard that one before. One of the local guys, he said, we're not going to get this out of it. Let's just move the net out of the way, because it's not going to catch fish anyway. Let's just move it so it's not an obstacle for anyone going up or down the river. So they kind of gingerly move it out of the way. They leave it drawn out and taut though, and so they continue on up. The locals wanted to take him to a spot where it's kind of a hidden trail that if you don't know where it's at, you'll pass it going on the river. But if you know where it's at, they'll nose in and tie off into the alders that are coming out over the river. And there's a trail that goes back into some excellent hunting area, berry picking and all that. So they were just basically showing him around. Well, as they get back up river from that net site, they're going along slow because they know they're getting close to the area, and they spot the little gap in the brush, and so they nose on in there. They tie off, and no sooner than they tie off and kill the kicker, they were gathering, guns and their snacks. They were going to go on a hike back in there and just check out the area for a while, and no harm, no foul, and then go do some fishing on the river later. So you got to remember, this is in the wee hours of the morning, between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. So they had started way earlier for the locals to come up the river to get him, and then they continued on upriver. So there's already been time on the river, and they're a little chilled or whatever, but the spirits are high. So they gather all their stuff, and Tim was going to bring his camera, and then opted out of it, and because he had to sling a rifle, shotgun. And one of the other locals had a shotgun, and the other local had a high caliber handgun, 44 or something like that. They were more concerned about bears because there's salmon in the river, and that area's got big, huge brown bears. So that was their main concern going in. So they offload, they got their little day packs and their weapons, and they start going down the trail. They just broke out of the brush, and to lay it out for you, they come out of the willows. It's tundra-like, small shrubs everywhere, and then it's opened up a little bit, and you got black spruce and some hardwoods off to the left and to the right, right and left, left, right. And there's a little bit of a gap in between, and the game trail that they're following cuts right between that gap. So just as they clear the shrubs off to their right hand side, it's pretty dense. It's still a lot of willow and alder shrubs that cut back, and the willows up into the black spruce and the hardwood on this side, and then it's more open over on this side with smaller berry shrubs. So they come out, and just as they clear, they're looking around, checking for fresh bear sign, because they heard some weird grunting as they were coming through the alders, but they couldn't make it out. As soon as they get to that area where they start looking for bear sign, or bear in general, they hear what sounds like a woman screaming, a legit woman screaming, about 50 yards ahead of them, off to the right, just inside the tree line of the black spruce off to their right. So not a very far distance. And the scream sounded like a natural woman screaming, no words, but a scream, like a very terrifying scream. So immediately, being young men, hey, let's go help this lady, let's go help this woman. So they start beelining that way, screaming out, hey, we're over here, we're over here. And of course they have their guns at the ready, because they don't know what they're walking into, with the woman sounding like she needed help. Tim told me that as they cleared about half the distance, and one of the locals that was leading, Tim was in the middle and the other guy behind him, slowed down and then kind of dropped to his knees and was kind of doing this number, looking up into the brush in the direction where the scream came from. Now they're approximately maybe 60-65 yards from where the skiff is tied off, wedged into these alders, right on the riverbank. And they're about, 60-65 yards, and the guy, his buddy's looking and looking. He goes, I don't think that's a woman. There's something big and dark over there. No sooner than he says that, they hear the scream again, and it is not the same scream. Tim said it sounded guttural, from guttural on up through the sound range up into the very high-pitched stuff. So it was all one scream, but it had every octave he could think of in between within that scream. He told me that he had drank chocolate milk that morning, and the scream was so intense, it made him, it stressed him so much, it curdled the milk in his stomach. That's pretty fucking intense, man, to experience a scream like that and have it physically affect you in a way that it instantly curdles the milk in your stomach that you drank that morning. Oof. So immediately after that second scream, locals are like, get to the skiff, and Tim is working on his nausea, because he's literally on the verge of blowing chunks with that curdled milk. And so the two locals are ahead of him as he turns, and he starts throwing up, and he's throwing projectile vomiting in front of himself, blowing out these chunks of curdled milk and trying to keep up. Now as they're going along, they hear Tim puking, and they all stop and turn around and say, hey, are you okay? And he gets it all out. He feels better. He's kind of cleaning himself up a little bit. And he goes, what's going on? What was that scream? He was asking for info, because he's heard weird screams similar to that in the years past, but he never got an answer. So he's asking a couple local guys, hey, what is that? One of them said, that's a hairy man, we gotta go. Tim immediately was like, the hairy man? What are you talking about? Like Bigfoot? And immediately they're like, look, it's no joke. Come on, we gotta go. It's gonna come after us. And he was thinking, Tim's thinking, it's gonna come out. He was trying to put it together, because he's, first of all, traumatized from the scream. He just got done puking, and now they're telling him, hey, the hairy man's gonna get us if we don't leave. So he's kind of like, these guys are fucking with me. He goes, and he stands there and he goes, come on, man, don't play jokes with me. Who's over there? Did you guys set this up? Immediately the locals are dead serious with them, say, hey, we're not fucking with you, get in the fucking, we gotta go, we gotta get in the skiff. As they're talking, this thing had moved from behind them on their left to basically parallel with them off to their left on the way back to the skiff, just inside that thicker dense stuff, just out of view of being able to see it. So it almost has them cut off to get into the skiff when it screams again. Same scream, same length, loudness, all that. So immediately they're all hauling ass down the trail because they feel like they're being pinned in or cut off at the pass, so to speak. So they're beelining. They get to the skiff, the two jump in, and Tim is untying from the limb they had it tied off on. As he's doing so, one of the guys fired up the kicker and is saying, jump in, untie, jump in. And so he does, so he's untying, and just as he's untying it and putting his knee up onto the bow to push off from the riverbank, a scream happens again, a lot closer, off to his left, just out of view. They saw, one of the other guys saw dark movement along with that scream that Tim didn't see because his back was to it. He pushes off, stumbles, falls into the river by the alders, and has to jump back up. Immediately woke up from that cold water, I can promise you that. Jumps into the skiff, scatters in there, gathers all this shit. They back out and they go up river a little ways, and Tim's, you know, trying to get important stuff out of his pockets so it doesn't get wet or needs to dry or whatever. And as they're doing so, he's asking questions about the hairy man, and all the locals would tell him is, if the hairy man's there, we're told you got to go, so we're going. And that's all they would indulge him with. So he said they went upriver about maybe a quarter to a half a mile. He wasn't really paying attention. Then they decided, get your cameras ready, get your gear ready. We're gonna drift down quietly and see if we can catch this thing out on the riverbank looking for us. So they figured they were gonna try to get some footage or a picture or something of this nature. So Tim's not cool with it because this thing made him curdle his milk and throw up. The locals are a little more at ease, more used to, you know, it, so to speak, are not as taken aback by it. So they start their drift down, and Tim's already not liking it because of the way the flow of the river was. It was pushing him to that side of the river real close to shore, to where some of the branches were rubbing along the side of the skiff, and Tim wanted a little more distance, so he was bringing that up. Hey, so he's pushing off with the oar. Everyone is kind of worried about how the skiff is maneuvering downriver versus actually looking around. I think one of the Tim said one of the other local guys was head on a swivel looking around, while the other, you know, Tim and the other guy were keeping them out into the channel. So they get to a spot to where it's a straight stretch, and so they put the oars down and they're gathering their stuff. Tim's getting his camera ready and all that. As they were doing that, the other local guy that wasn't messing with the camera, he had his shotgun. He gets up on the bench seat of the Lund skiff. It was a 20-footer, and there's like 4 bench seats that run across those things. So he's standing on one of them, one of the front ones, and is looking at the alders and the willows off to their left-hand side as they're coming back down river. As they're doing so, they hear, they don't have the outboard running, they're drifting. So there's no noise outside of what noise they're making in the skiff. At that point, they heard outboards out on the Nushagak River, but none on the Kokwok River where they were. So they're hearing all this noises going on off in the distance. Well, they hear this splash, 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 like real loud splashing, and they're like, oh, we're coming up. It must be crossing the river, or maybe it's a moose or something. Let's be ready with the cameras. As they come down, they see nothing. They could see the water ripple from whatever moving through. There was no footprints to be seen because of the river flow and all that. And up on the other bank where it had gotten out, it was all tall sawgrass and stuff. So they couldn't, there was no definitive trackway. They knew what direction it went, but there was no tracks left. It went from the river into the tall grass, and there was no tracks to be had. So they, one of the locals grabbed one of the oars and was digging it in, trying to slow, because they were gaining momentum as they were drifting down. So he dug in, and the other guy grabbed the oar and dug in to slow down to a stop, and then continue the drift again. And so as they're putting the oars back down to continue the drift, Tim's got his camera ready. Now at this point, they're coming up to where that net was. When they get to the point of the net, they're about 25 yards from it. It's on their right hand side now. As they're drifting down, they hear another scream coming from their right hand side. So this thing had crossed the river, was down below them. They didn't feel like it was chasing them. They just felt coincidentally we're coming down as it was leaving the area. That's the feeling they got. They weren't feeling stalked. So this thing lets out another scream. It was a little different, but really intense. Well, it got all their attention. As their attention is on that, they notice the net is being pulled by its lead rope, which they couldn't see. It was just out of view. The lead rope pulls the net halfway out of the water and into the brush, and then they hear the scream again, and then thrashing and breaking off into the trees. And so immediately they're like, okay, we're done. One of the locals fires up the outboard, and they hit the Nushagak River, and they went up river a ways just to sport fish, drink some cold beer, and just get the hell out of Dodge. I want to thank Tim for sharing that. He was really embarrassed about throwing up the milk, which I understand, but we're grown-ups here, buddy. We get it. You didn't ask for that shit. No one who asked for this kind of thing to happen, you know. Again, I want to thank Tim for sharing. And when I talk to those guys that had took you, Tim, I will be sure to relay that message you asked me to. And I want to thank you guys for joining me, and we'll catch you on the next one.